The letter arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in spring 1883, and Theresa Thompson's hands trembled as she read the words that would end her marriage. "I cannot remain bound to a barren woman who has failed in her most basic duty as a wife." She stood in the kitchen of the small house in St. Louis, Missouri, that had been her home for 3 years, feeling the walls close in around her. Her husband, Richard, had not even possessed the courage to speak these words to her face. Instead, he had left for his business trip to Chicago and sent this cold, clinical letter explaining that he had filed for divorce on grounds of her inability to bear children. The paper crinkled in her grip as tears blurred her vision. At 24 years old, Theresa had believed her life was settled, that she had found security and perhaps even affection in her marriage. Now she understood that to Richard, she had been nothing more than a vessel meant to produce heirs for his modest fortune. The divorce proceedings moved with surprising speed. Richard's family had money and influence, and within 2 months, Theresa found herself standing outside the courthouse, legally severed from the man who had promised to love her in sickness and health. The judge had been sympathetic but firm. Richard's lawyer had presented medical testimony, though Theresa had protested that 3 years was hardly enough time to declare such a permanent condition. Her protests fell on deaf ears. The scandal followed her like a shadow. St. Louis society, which had welcomed her as Richard's wife, now whispered behind gloved hands. The word Barren seemed to echo in every room she entered. Her own family, embarrassed by the divorce, suggested she might be happier elsewhere. Her father, a banker who valued reputation above all else, could barely meet her eyes. Her mother wept but offered no real comfort or defense. Theresa made her decision on a humid July evening, watching the sun set over the Mississippi River. She would go west, to a place where no one knew her story, where she might build a new life free from the weight of society's judgment. She had a small inheritance from her grandmother, enough to start fresh if she was careful. The journey to Las Vegas, New Mexico, took 3 weeks by train and stagecoach. Theresa had chosen the town almost at random, drawn by an advertisement seeking a schoolteacher for the growing community. The position offered modest pay and lodging, and most importantly, it was nearly 1,000 miles from St. Louis and the ruins of her old life. Las Vegas sat in a valley surrounded by mountains, the Sangre de Cristo Range rising dramatically to the west. The town was divided into 2 parts: Old Town, with its Spanish plaza and adobe buildings, and New Town, which had sprung up around the railroad depot with its wooden storefronts and ambitious optimism. Theresa arrived on a dusty August afternoon, her trunk containing everything she owned, her heart determined to prove that she was more than the label her former husband had branded her with. The schoolhouse was a simple wooden structure on the edge of New Town, freshly painted white with real glass windows, a luxury in this part of the territory. Theresa met with the town council, 5 men who seemed relieved to have found an educated woman willing to teach their children. They asked no questions about her past, and she volunteered nothing beyond her qualifications and references from a sympathetic former teacher in St. Louis who had been willing to overlook the scandal. Her lodging was a small apartment above the general store, 2 rooms with a wood stove and basic furniture. The owner, Mrs. Garcia, a round-faced Mexican woman with kind eyes, helped her settle in and offered advice about surviving the high desert climate. Theresa threw herself into preparing for the school term, which would begin in September. She met her students' families, learned about the community, and tried not to think about the loneliness that crept in during the quiet evenings. It was on one of these quiet evenings, 3 weeks after her arrival, that Theresa first encountered Ethan Nash. She had been walking back from the plaza after purchasing supplies when she heard shouting from the livery stable. Two men were arguing, their voices rising in anger. Theresa knew she should walk past, that it was not her concern, but something made her pause. One voice was slurred with drink, threatening and mean. The other was calm but firm, trying to defuse the situation. "You cheated me," the drunk man shouted. "That horse you sold me came up lame after 2 days. I told you she had a tender right foreleg, Tom. I told you to let her rest for a week before putting her to hard work. You rode her straight through to Santa Fe and back. That's not my doing. You're a liar and a cheat, Nash. Everyone knows it." Theresa peered around the corner of the stable and saw them. The drunk man was swaying, his hand hovering near the gun at his hip. The other man stood relaxed, his hands visible and empty, but Theresa could see the coiled readiness in his posture. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with sun-darkened skin and dark hair that curled at his collar. His clothes were dusty from travel, a blue shirt and dark pants with worn boots. A hat hung down his back on a leather cord. "I am not going to fight you, Tom. You are drunk, and you know as well as I do that you pushed that mare too hard. Go home, sleep it off, and tomorrow we will talk about what can be done." "We will talk about it now," Tom growled, and his hand moved toward his gun. Theresa did not think. She stepped around the corner and called out, "Excuse me, gentlemen. I am looking for the livery owner. I need to arrange for a horse." Both men turned to stare at her. Tom's hand froze, and the dark-haired man, Nash, met her eyes with a look of surprise and something that might have been gratitude. "Madam," Nash said carefully, "the livery owner is gone for the day. Perhaps you could come back tomorrow." "Oh, but I was told to come this evening," Theresa said, walking closer despite the warning look Nash shot her. "Are you associated with the livery, sir? Perhaps you could help me." Tom muttered something under his breath and stumbled backward. "This is not finished, Nash," he said, but the moment had broken. He turned and wove his way down the street, leaving Theresa and Nash standing in the fading light. Nash watched Tom disappear around a corner before turning to Theresa. His eyes were a startling shade of green, unusual against his tanned face. "That was either very brave or very foolish, miss," he said quietly. "Probably foolish," Theresa admitted, her heart pounding now that the danger had passed. "But I could not stand by and watch someone get shot over a misunderstanding. It might have been more than a misunderstanding if you had not intervened." Nash studied her for a moment, then touched his forehead in a casual salute. "I am grateful, though you should not have put yourself at risk. I am Ethan Nash, and I do work with the livery when I am in town, among other things. Theresa Thompson, I am the new school teacher." Something shifted in his expression, a flicker of interest. "I heard someone had taken the position. Welcome to Las Vegas, Miss Thompson, or is it Mrs.?" "Miss," Theresa said firmly, daring him to ask more. He did not. Instead, he smiled, and it transformed his serious face into something warmer. "Well then, Miss Thompson, since you are here on the pretense of needing a horse, why don't you let me show you what we have available?" Unless that was entirely a fiction, Theresa found herself smiling back. "It was a fiction, I am afraid. I have no need of a horse at present." "A shame. But perhaps I could walk you back to your lodging. The streets can be unpredictable in the evenings, as you have just witnessed." Theresa knew she should decline, that accepting would be forward and improper, but something about Ethan Nash made her want to break the rules that had confined her old life. "I would appreciate that, Mr. Nash." They walked through the dusty streets as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Ethan asked about her journey west and her impressions of Las Vegas. Theresa found herself talking more freely than she had in months, describing the landscape and the people she had met. Ethan listened with genuine attention, occasionally pointing out landmarks or sharing stories about the town's colorful history. "What is it that you do, Mr. Nash?" Theresa asked as they neared the general store. "You mentioned working with the livery among other things." "I am a cowboy mostly," Ethan said. "I work cattle drives, break horses, help ranchers with difficult stock. I am not tied to any one ranch, which some folks think makes me unreliable, but it suits me. I like the freedom of it." "That sounds like an interesting life." "It can be. It can also be lonely and hard, sleeping under the stars more often than under a roof." He paused at the base of the stairs leading up to her apartment, "But I would not trade it for sitting behind a desk in some office." "I can understand that," Theresa said softly. "Sometimes we need to break free from what others expect of us." Ethan looked at her with those keen green eyes, and Theresa had the unsettling feeling that he could see more than she intended to reveal. "That sounds like the voice of experience, Miss Thompson." "Perhaps it is." She offered her hand. "Thank you for the escort, Mr. Nash. And please be careful with Tom. He seemed quite angry." Ethan took her hand, his grip warm and calloused. "Tom will cool off once he is sober, but I will be careful, and I hope you will be too. Not all confrontations end as peacefully as this one." Theresa watched him walk back toward the livery, his long stride easy and confident. She climbed the stairs to her apartment feeling more alive than she had in months, though she could not quite explain why. The school term began the following week, and Theresa discovered that teaching 15 children ranging from age 6 to 14 in a single room was both exhausting and deeply rewarding. Her students came from diverse backgrounds: Mexican families who had lived in the area for generations, new Anglo settlers, even a few children whose parents worked at the nearby hot springs resort. Theresa treated each child with equal respect and attention, and slowly they began to trust her. She did not see Ethan Nash for several weeks after their first meeting. She heard his name mentioned occasionally. He had brought in a string of wild horses from the plains. He had helped a rancher track down stolen cattle. He had won a horse race at the plaza. He seemed to be well known and generally well liked, though she detected a note of reservation when some of the more established townspeople spoke of him. He was seen as capable but rootless, a man who would never settle down. It was late September when their paths crossed again. Theresa had taken her students on a nature walk to collect leaves and rocks for a science lesson, following a creek that ran through a cottonwood grove south of town. The afternoon was beautiful, the air crisp with the first hint of autumn, and the children were laughing and exploring with enthusiasm. Theresa was helping a young girl identify different types of rocks when she heard a hoarse whinny. She looked up to see Ethan Nash riding toward them on a handsome bay gelding, leading 2 other horses behind him. He raised a hand in greeting and guided his animals to the creek to drink. "Miss Thompson," he called, "this is an unexpected pleasure." The children had noticed him now, and several of the boys ran over to admire the horses. Theresa followed, trying to ignore the way her pulse quickened at seeing him again. "We are on a scientific expedition," she said lightly, "studying the natural world." Ethan dismounted with fluid grace. "A worthy pursuit. Are you finding interesting specimens?" "Rocks, mostly, and one very excited beetle that caused quite a commotion." He laughed, and the sound was warm and genuine. The children pressed around him with questions about the horses, and Theresa watched as he patiently answered each one, his manner easy and kind. He let them pet the animals, showed them how to check a hoof for stones, explained the different gaits and personalities of each horse. It was clear he had a natural way with children, and Theresa felt something soften in her chest as she watched. When the children finally returned to their exploring, Ethan walked over to where Theresa stood in the shade of a large cottonwood. "You are good with them," she said. "I like children. They are honest in a way adults often are not." He leaned against the tree, studying her face. "How are you settling into Las Vegas life?" "Well enough. The people have been welcoming and the teaching keeps me busy. But you are lonely." Theresa was startled by his directness. "What makes you say that?" I recognize the signs. "I have been lonely often enough myself." He said it matter-of-factly, without self-pity. "There is a dance at the plaza this Saturday evening. Would you do me the honor of attending with me?" Theresa hesitated. She had been avoiding social events, wary of questions about her past. But she was tired of hiding, tired of letting Richard's cruelty define her future. "I would like that," she said. Ethan's smile was like sunrise. "I will call for you at 7 if that suits you." 7 would be perfect. Saturday arrived with unseasonable warmth, and Theresa spent an embarrassing amount of time choosing what to wear. She finally settled on a simple dress of dark blue cotton with cream-colored lace at the collar and cuffs, the nicest thing she owned that was not hopelessly formal. She pinned her light brown hair up carefully and allowed herself a touch of rose water at her wrists. Ethan arrived precisely at 7, dressed in clean black pants and a white shirt that made his tanned skin seem even darker. He had clearly made an effort, his hair neatly combed, his boots polished. He offered her his arm with old-fashioned courtesy, and they walked together through the cooling evening toward the plaza. The dance was held in the open square, with lanterns strung between the buildings and a small group of musicians playing fiddle, guitar, and accordion. The music was lively, a mix of Mexican and American folk tunes, and people of all ages had gathered to dance and socialize. Theresa felt nervous as they entered the crowd, but Ethan's steady presence beside her was reassuring. They danced several dances, and Theresa discovered that Ethan was surprisingly graceful for such a tall man. He held her at a respectful distance, but with confidence, guiding her through the steps with ease. Between dances, they talked, really talked, sharing stories and opinions in a way that felt both natural and exhilarating. Ethan told her about growing up on a small ranch in Texas, the youngest of 4 brothers. His parents had died of fever when he was 16, and the ranch had been sold to pay debts. His brothers had scattered, finding work where they could, and Ethan had drifted north, learning the cowboy trade and discovering he preferred the independence of freelance work to being tied to one place. "You ever see your brothers?" Theresa asked as they sat on a bench, catching their breath. "Sometimes. We cross paths every few years. They are good men, but we each have our own lives now." He paused, then asked gently, "What about your family?" Theresa stared at her hands. She had known this question would come, but she had not prepared an answer. The truth seemed too painful, too revealing, but something about the warm night and Ethan's open expression made her want to be honest. "I am not close with my family anymore," she said slowly. "There was a falling out. It is one reason I came west. I am sorry." Family troubles can be the hardest kind. "Yes," she looked up at him. "Do you ever want to settle down, have a place of your own again?" Ethan was quiet for a moment, watching the dancers spin past. "I used to think I did not. I liked the freedom too much. But lately, I have been wondering if maybe freedom is just another word for having no one who matters enough to stay for." He turned to her, his green eyes serious. "What about you, Miss Thompson? Do you plan to stay in Las Vegas, or are you just passing through like I am?" "I do not know," Theresa admitted. "I came here to escape my old life, to prove something to myself. I suppose I have not thought much beyond that." "What are you trying to prove?" The question was simple, but it struck at the heart of everything. Theresa took a breath. that I am worth more than I was told I was worth. Ethan reached over and took her hand, his touch gentle but sure. I have known you only a short time, Theresa Thompson, but I can tell you this with absolute certainty. Anyone who made you doubt your worth was a fool. Tears pricked at Theresa's eyes, but they were not tears of sadness. No one had spoken to her with such simple conviction in longer than she could remember. "Thank you," she whispered. They stayed at the dance until nearly midnight, long after propriety suggested Theresa should have returned home. When Ethan finally walked her back to her apartment, they moved slowly, neither wanting the evening to end. At the base of the stairs, Ethan took both her hands in his. "I would very much like to see you again if you are willing." "I would like that too." "I will be in town for another week before I need to take a job helping to move a herd up to Colorado. But when I return, may I call on you properly?" "Yes," Theresa said, and meant it with her whole heart. Ethan lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "Good night, Theresa." She watched him walk away into the night, her hand still tingling from his kiss, her mind already counting the days until she would see him again. The week passed in a blur of teaching and stolen moments with Ethan. He appeared at the schoolhouse with flowers picked from the meadows, sat in the back of the classroom one afternoon and watched her teach with obvious admiration, took her on a buggy ride through the hills to see the aspens turning gold. They talked endlessly, discovering shared loves of books and music and the natural world. Ethan told her about the vast loneliness of the prairie and the fierce beauty of thunderstorms rolling across open land. Theresa shared her dreams of making a real difference in her students' lives, of building something meaningful. They did not speak of anything too serious, not yet, but Theresa could feel the connection between them deepening with each conversation, each shared glance. When Ethan laughed at something she said, she felt lighter than air. When his hand brushed hers as they walked, electricity seemed to arc between them. The day before he was to leave for Colorado, Ethan took Theresa riding. He had borrowed a gentle mare from the livery, and though Theresa's riding skills were rusty, she trusted him to keep her safe. They rode out to a mesa overlooking the valley, dismounted, and sat on sun-warmed rocks while the horses grazed nearby. "I do not want to leave tomorrow," Ethan said, staring out at the vast landscape. "How long will you be gone? 6 weeks, maybe 2 months. It depends on the weather and the herd." He turned to her, his expression troubled. "Theresa, I need to tell you something before I go." Theresa's heart clenched. "What is it?" "I am falling in love with you." The words came out raw and honest. "I know it is too soon, that we have known each other only a few weeks, but I cannot leave without telling you. You have become the person I think about when I wake up and the last thought before I sleep. If you do not feel the same, tell me now, and I will not burden you with this." Theresa felt tears spill down her cheeks, but they were tears of relief and joy. "I feel the same," she said. "I tried not to, tried to protect myself, but Ethan, I am falling in love with you too." He pulled her into his arms, holding her close, and Theresa felt safer than she had in years. They sat like that for a long time, wrapped in each other's warmth, watching the sun sink toward the mountains. Finally, Ethan pulled back enough to look at her face. "There is something I need to know if we are going to move forward. What hurt you so badly, Theresa? What are you running from?" This was the moment she had been dreading, but she owed him the truth. She took a breath and told him everything. About Richard, about the divorce, about being declared barren and cast aside. She told him about the shame and the whispers, about her family's rejection, about the label that had been branded on her soul. When she finished, she could not look at him, terrified of what she would see in his eyes, but Ethan gently tilted her face up. "That man was a coward and a fool," he said fiercely. "What he did to you was cruel beyond measure, But Theresa, you need to hear this. You are not broken. You are not less than anyone else. 3 years is not enough time to make such a judgment, and even if it were true, even if you could never bear children, it would not change your value as a person. But what if it is true? Theresa whispered. What if I cannot give you children? What if I am barren? Ethan was quiet for a long moment, and Theresa felt her heart breaking. But when he spoke, his words were not what she expected. Then we will grow love instead of children. Theresa stared at him, not understanding. Ethan took both her hands, his grip strong and sure. Listen to me. I would be lying if I said I had never thought about having children. I have. But what I want most in this world is not a family of a certain size or shape. What I want is a partner. Someone to build a life with, someone to share the joys and sorrows, someone to love and be loved by. If God blesses us with children, I will be grateful. If He does not, I will still count myself the luckiest man alive if you will have me. Ethan, Theresa breathed. We can grow a different kind of family if we need to, he continued. We can love each other, love this land, love the people around us. We can make our lives full and rich and meaningful in 1,000 ways. Love does not only come in one form, Theresa. And I choose to love you, whatever that means, whatever shape our life together takes. Theresa threw her arms around his neck, sobbing now with relief and wonder. Ethan held her tightly, his hand stroking her hair, murmuring soft words of comfort and love. When she finally pulled back, she kissed him, pouring everything she felt into that kiss. Ethan responded with matching passion, and for several long minutes they forgot everything but each other. As the sun set and the air grew cool, they rode back to town. At her door, Ethan kissed her once more. I will write to you from the trail if I can, he promised. And when I come back, we need to talk seriously about our future. But Theresa, I want you to know I am committed to this, to us. Do not doubt that while I am gone. I will not, she promised. Come back safe. I will move heaven and earth to get back to you. The 2 months while Ethan was gone were the longest of Theresa's life. She threw herself into teaching, started a small library with donated books, organized evening reading classes for adults who wanted to learn. Mrs. Garcia became a true friend, sharing meals and conversation. Theresa began to feel rooted in Las Vegas in a way she never had in St. Louis. Ethan kept his promise to write, and every 2 weeks or so, a letter would arrive. They were not long letters, written in a bold, simple hand during stolen moments around the campfire. But they were filled with observations about the land and the cattle, little jokes and always, expressions of love and longing that made Theresa's heart ache with happiness. She wrote back just as faithfully, telling him about her students' progress, about the approaching winter, about the home she was slowly making. She told him about her growing friendships and small triumphs. She told him she loved him and was counting the days until his return. It was early November when Ethan finally rode back into Las Vegas. Theresa was in the schoolhouse, working on lessons after the students had left, when the door opened and he stepped inside. He was thinner, weathered from 2 months on the trail, but his eyes were as green and bright as ever. Theresa ran to him and he caught her up, swinging her around before setting her down and kissing her thoroughly. I missed you, he said against her hair. God, how I missed you. I missed you too. Tell me everything. They sat in the schoolhouse as the light faded, and Ethan told her about the drive, the challenges of keeping the herd together, a close call with rustlers, a terrible storm that scattered the cattle for 2 days. He had earned good money enough to make plans with, and that brought him to what he really wanted to say. Theresa, I have been thinking the entire time I was gone. I am tired of drifting. I want to put down roots, build something permanent. There is a small ranch for sale about 10 miles south of here, Nothing fancy, but good water and decent grazing land. I have enough saved to make a down payment. I want to buy it, start raising horses seriously, make a real life." "That sounds wonderful," Theresa said, though she wondered where she fit into this plan. Ethan took a deep breath. "I want to do it with you. Theresa Thompson, will you marry me?" Theresa's breath caught. She wanted to say yes immediately, but fear held her back. "Are you certain?" "You know what I might not be able to give you." "I know exactly what you can give me," Ethan said firmly. "Love, partnership, a reason to build something lasting. That is more than enough. That is everything. So I will ask again, will you marry me?" This time Theresa did not hesitate. "Yes. Yes, I will marry you." Ethan kissed her with such joy that they were both laughing and crying at once. They sat together making plans long after dark had fallen. They would marry in December, have a simple ceremony at the church in the plaza. They would buy the ranch and work together to build it up. Theresa would continue teaching until the end of the school year, then decide if she wanted to keep teaching or focus on the ranch. They would face whatever came together. The wedding took place on a bright, cold day just before Christmas. Theresa wore a new dress of deep green wool that Mrs. Garcia had helped her make, and she carried a bouquet of dried wildflowers mixed with winter greenery. Ethan wore a new suit that made him look both handsome and slightly uncomfortable, and he could not stop smiling. The church was full of townspeople who had come to support them. Some of Theresa's students sang a hymn, their voices sweet and clear. When the priest asked if anyone objected to the union, there was only warm silence. When Ethan kissed his bride, the congregation applauded. The celebration afterward at the hotel was joyful and lasted well into the evening. Theresa danced with her new husband, with her students' fathers, with the sheriff and the mayor and the baker. She was surrounded by community and acceptance, and the ghost of her old shame seemed to finally loosen its grip on her heart. That night, in the small room Ethan had rented at the hotel, they came together as husband and wife. Ethan was gentle and patient, and Theresa felt cherished in a way she never had before. Afterward, they lay in each other's arms, talking quietly about the future. "No regrets?" Ethan asked, his fingers tracing patterns on her shoulder. "Not a single one. You." "Only that I did not meet you years ago." He kissed her forehead. "We are going to have a good life, Theresa Nash. I promise you that." They moved to the ranch in January 1884. It was small, as Ethan had said, just a simple house with 2 bedrooms, a barn, and several outbuildings. But the land was beautiful, rolling hills covered in grama grass, with a clear stream running through the property and the mountains visible in the distance. Ethan had already purchased 6 horses, the foundation of what he hoped to build into a successful breeding and training operation. Theresa discovered she loved ranch life. She learned to care for the horses, to help Ethan with training, to manage the household and garden. In spring, she planted vegetables and herbs, determined to make the ranch as self-sufficient as possible. She continued teaching 3 days a week, making the ride into town on a gentle mare Ethan had chosen specifically for her. The work was hard but satisfying. They fell into routines and rhythms, learning each other's habits and moods. They had disagreements occasionally, normal friction between 2 strong-willed people learning to share a life, but they always talked through their problems and never went to bed angry. As the months passed with no sign of pregnancy, Theresa felt the old fear trying to creep back in. She caught herself watching Ethan when he interacted with children, looking for signs of regret or disappointment. But Ethan seemed genuinely content with their life. He never mentioned children, never seemed to be waiting for news, and when Theresa tentatively brought up her worries one night, he pulled her close. "I meant what I said on that mesa," he told her. "This life we are building is enough. You are enough." Please stop waiting for me to realize I made a mistake, because it is not going to happen. Summer brought a new challenge. A neighbor's ranch hand, a young man named Miguel, approached them with a desperate request. His sister had died in childbirth, and her husband, unable to care for their two young children while working his farm, was talking about sending them to an orphanage. Miguel asked if Theresa and Ethan might be willing to take the children temporarily, just until other arrangements could be made. Theresa and Ethan looked at each other across the kitchen table. Without words, they reached the same decision. "Bring them here," Ethan said. "We have room, and they should not be separated from family if it can be helped." The children arrived the next day. Carlos was 7, serious-eyed and protective of his little sister. Rosa was 4, tiny and silent with grief. Theresa's heart broke for them, these small souls who had lost so much. She and Ethan did their best to make the children comfortable. Carlos was given the second bedroom, and Rosa slept on a small bed they set up in Theresa and Ethan's room. Theresa cooked the foods Miguel said they liked, spoke to them gently in a mix of English and her limited Spanish, and did not push them to talk before they were ready. Ethan was wonderful with the children. He took Carlos out to help with the horses, teaching him to curry and feed them, giving him small tasks that made him feel useful. He carved wooden animals for Rosa and told her stories in the evenings. Slowly, painfully slowly, the children began to heal. What was meant to be a temporary arrangement stretched into weeks, then months. The children's father visited but was clearly overwhelmed by his grief and circumstances. He had no family support and no way to care for two small children while working his land. Finally, he came to Theresa and Ethan with a heartbreaking proposal. "They are happy here," he said, tears streaming down his weathered face. "Happier than I can make them. Would you consider keeping them? I will still see them, still be their father, but I think they need a mother and a stable home. I cannot give them that." Theresa and Ethan talked long into the night. They had grown to love these children, but taking them permanently was a huge decision. Could they do it? Could they give Carlos and Rosa what they needed? "I think we already are," Ethan said finally. "Theresa, they feel like ours already. I do not want to send them away." "Neither do I," Theresa admitted. "But this is not what you signed up for. You married me knowing we might never have children, and now I am asking you to take on two who are not even ours. They could be ours if we choose, and I choose yes, if you do." Theresa thought about Carlos's rare smiles when he successfully completed a task with the horses, about Rosa calling for her in the night and clinging to her with desperate trust. She thought about the empty label she had carried for so long, barren, unable to bear fruit. But these children were fruit of a different kind. They were love growing in unexpected soil. They were the family she and Ethan could nurture together, not through biology but through choice and commitment and daily acts of care. "Yes," she said, "let us make them ours." The legal arrangements took time, but by the end of 1884, Carlos and Rosa officially became Carlos and Rosa Nash. Their father remained in their lives, visiting regularly and maintaining a relationship with his children, but he was grateful to see them thriving. Theresa left her teaching position to focus full-time on the children and the ranch. She taught Carlos and Rosa at home, along with basic skills they would need in life. Carlos showed a natural talent with horses, and Ethan began seriously training him. Rosa followed Theresa everywhere, learning to cook and garden and care for the household. The ranch prospered. Ethan's reputation as a horse trainer grew, and people came from miles around to purchase his animals or pay for his training services. Theresa started raising chickens and selling eggs, then expanded into selling vegetables and preserves. They hired Miguel as a permanent ranch hand, and he built a small cabin on the property for himself. Life was full and busy and rich. There were hard times. A bad winter that killed several horses, Rosa getting sick with a fever that terrified them all, Carlos going through a difficult period of grief and anger when he fully understood that his mother was never coming back. But they faced each challenge as a family, supporting each other, growing stronger together. 3 years after they had taken in Carlos and Rosa, on a spring morning in 1887, Theresa woke feeling strange. She dismissed it as something she ate, but when the feeling persisted for several days, along with other subtle changes, she allowed herself to wonder. She did not tell Ethan, not wanting to raise hopes that might be dashed, but she paid attention to her body in a way she had not in years. When she was 2 weeks late with her monthly courses, she rode into town to see Dr. Martinez, the physician who had recently set up practice in Las Vegas. He examined her carefully, asked detailed questions, and finally smiled. "Congratulations, Mrs. Nash. You are going to have a baby." Theresa sat in stunned silence. "Are you certain? I was told I could not conceive." "Whoever told you that was wrong. These things are not always predictable. You are definitely pregnant. I would estimate about 8 weeks along." Theresa rode home in a daze. She had built a life around the assumption that she would never bear children. She and Ethan had created a family through other means, and she was happy, truly happy. This news felt surreal, impossible, like a dream she might wake from. She found Ethan in the barn, working with a young stallion. Carlos was helping him, and the sight of them together made her heart swell. This was her family, unexpected and unconventional and absolutely perfect. Ethan looked up as she entered, and his expression immediately changed to concern. "What is wrong? You look pale." "Nothing is wrong. I need to talk to you, alone." Carlos took the hint and left. Ethan came over, gripping her shoulders. "Theresa, you are frightening me. What happened in town?" "I went to see Dr. Martinez." "Ethan, I am pregnant." Ethan's hands went slack. He stared at her as if she had spoken in a foreign language. "What?" "I am going to have a baby." Dr. Martinez confirmed it. "But you said you could not." "I was wrong. Or Richard was wrong. Or it just took longer than 3 years. I do not know, Ethan. I do not understand it, but it is happening." Ethan sat down heavily on a hay bale, his face a mixture of shock and wonder. "A baby? We are going to have a baby?" "Yes." Theresa knelt in front of him, taking his hands. "Are you happy? I know this was not part of the plan." Ethan laughed, a sound that bordered on hysteria. "Not part of the plan, Theresa, it is a miracle. Yes, I am happy. I am terrified and amazed and happy." He pulled her into his arms. "Are you happy?" "I am," Theresa said, surprised to find it true. "I am happy and scared and confused. I built my whole new life around not being able to have this, and now that I can, I do not know how to feel. We will figure it out together, just like we have figured out everything else." Ethan kissed her gently. "Carlos and Rosa are going to be excited about being older siblings." They were. When Theresa and Ethan told them that evening at dinner, Carlos's face lit up with pure joy, and Rosa bounced in her seat, already planning how she would help take care of the baby. Their excitement was contagious, and Theresa felt the last of her fear melting away. The pregnancy was not easy. Theresa struggled with sickness in the early months and exhaustion that sometimes left her unable to do her normal work. Ethan took over many of her tasks without complaint, and Rosa became her shadow, always ready to fetch things or just provide company. Carlos and Miguel handled more of the ranch work, giving Ethan time to care for his wife. As Theresa's belly grew, she sometimes felt guilty about the life she had before, about the years she had mourned children she thought she could never have. But mostly, she felt grateful. Grateful for the journey that had brought her here, grateful for the man who had loved her without conditions, grateful for the children who had taught her that family was about more than blood. In late November, with the mountains already dusted with snow, Theresa went into labor. Dr. Martinez came to the ranch, along with Mrs. Garcia, who had become like a mother to Theresa. Rosa was sent to stay with a neighbor, but Carlos refused to leave, stationing himself on the porch and waiting with the same patient determination his father showed. The labor was long and difficult. There were moments when Dr. Martinez looked worried, when Ethan's face went white with fear. But Theresa was strong from years of ranch work, and she was determined. As the sun set on November 28, 1887, she gave birth to a healthy baby boy. Ethan held his son with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face. "He is perfect," he whispered. "Theresa, he is absolutely perfect." They named him James after Ethan's father, with the middle name Miguel to honor the man who had trusted them with his niece and nephew. When Carlos was finally allowed in to meet his new brother, he touched the baby's tiny hand with reverent gentleness. "He is so small," Carlos said in wonder. "You were this small once," Theresa said, tired but happy beyond measure. "Will you love him more than us?" Carlos asked quietly, and Theresa heard the real fear beneath the question. "No," Ethan said firmly, crouching beside Carlos. "We will never love him more than you and Rosa. We will love him differently because he is a different person, but not more. You and Rosa made us a family. You taught us how to be parents. James is blessed to have you as his older brother." Carlos nodded, satisfied, and gently kissed the baby's forehead. The years that followed were perhaps the happiest of Theresa's life. James grew into a lively, curious toddler, adored by his older siblings. Carlos developed into a skilled horseman, working alongside Ethan as a true partner in the ranch. Rosa showed a talent for numbers and began helping Theresa keep the ranch accounts. In 1889, Theresa gave birth to twin girls, Emma and Grace, and the ranch house burst at the seams with life and noise and love. Ethan built an addition, adding 2 more bedrooms and expanding the kitchen. Miguel married and brought his wife, Ana, to live in the cabin, and Ana became Theresa's close friend and helper. The ranch itself continued to thrive. Ethan's horses were sought after throughout the territory, and he was able to purchase more land, expanding their operation. Theresa's gardens and preserves became known for their quality, and she began supplying several stores in town. They were not wealthy, but they were comfortable, and more importantly, they were happy. In 1891, New Mexico experienced a terrible drought. Ranches throughout the territory suffered, and many families faced financial ruin. Theresa and Ethan made the decision to help where they could, extending credit to neighbors, sharing their well water, even taking in another family whose ranch had failed until they could get back on their feet. "We were given so much," Theresa said one night as they surveyed their land, watching the sunset paint the dry hills in shades of gold. "It feels right to share it." Ethan pulled her close. "Do you ever think about where we started? You, fleeing a cruel husband and a label that was wrong. Me, drifting with no purpose. Look at us now." "Sometimes I think I should be angry about the years I lost to Richard's cruelty," Theresa admitted, "but I cannot seem to feel angry anymore. If I had not gone through that pain, I might never have come west. I might never have met you. All of this might never have happened. Then we will grow love instead of children," Ethan quoted softly, the words he had spoken on that mesa 7 years ago. Theresa laughed. "We certainly grew love, and children too, as it turns out." "We grew a life," Ethan said. "That is what we did. We planted seeds of love and tended them, and look at the harvest." They stood together in the fading light, surrounded by the evidence of that harvest. The house full of children's laughter, the horses grazing peacefully, the land that had become truly theirs through years of work and dedication. They had built something real and lasting, not despite the pain of their pasts, but in some ways because of it. They had learned what truly mattered, what was worth fighting for. Carlos turned 18 in 1895, and Ethan officially made him a partner in the ranch. Carlos had more than earned it, working tirelessly and showing real business acumen in addition to his skills with horses. Rosa, at 14, had become an accomplished young woman, still helping with the household, but also pursuing her studies with the goal of becoming a teacher herself, inspired by Theresa's example. James, at 7, was already showing signs of combining his older brother's way with horses and his father's stubborn determination. The twins, Emma and Grace, were 6 and completely inseparable, two sides of the same coin with their mother's light brown hair and their father's green eyes. In the spring of 1896, Theresa discovered she was pregnant again. At 37, she had thought her childbearing years were behind her, but life had one more surprise for her. This pregnancy was easier than the others, and in December, she gave birth to another boy, whom they named Thomas after Theresa's maiden name, a way of reclaiming a part of her past that had once brought only pain. Their family was complete, spread across ages and bound by choice as much as blood. When people in town remarked on their unusual family, on the mix of adopted and biological children, Theresa would simply smile. She had learned that love did not care about such distinctions, that a family was defined not by how it came together, but by how it chose to stay together. Ethan's hair was starting to show gray at the temples, and Theresa had fine lines around her eyes from years of squinting into the sun. They were not the young people who had met at a livery stable in 1883, but they were better. They were seasoned and tested and still deeply in love. On a warm evening in June 1898, the whole family gathered on the porch after dinner. Carlos had brought his new wife, Elena, a kind-hearted young woman from Old Town. Rosa was teaching the twins a song she had learned. James and little Thomas were playing with a wooden horse Ethan had carved. Miguel and Ana and their 3 children had joined them, as they often did. Theresa sat in the rocking chair Ethan had made for her, watching the scene with a heart so full she thought it might burst. Ethan came out of the house and handed her a cup of coffee, then settled into the chair beside her, taking her hand. "What are you thinking about?" he asked quietly. "Everything," Theresa said. "How far we have come, how different life is from what I thought it would be. Better or worse?" "So much better. Ethan, I was so lost when I came here. I was broken and bitter and convinced I had no value. You gave me everything." "No," Ethan said firmly. "You gave yourself everything. You had the courage to start over, to take a chance on a drifting cowboy who had nothing but a dream and a promise. I am the one who got everything." "We both got everything," Theresa said, squeezing his hand. "We got this beautiful, messy, imperfect, perfect life." As the sun set behind the mountains and the first stars appeared, the family stayed on the porch, talking and laughing. Inside the house, the table still held the remains of dinner, evidence of the daily work of love. In the barn, horses nickered softly to each other. Across the land, the ranch spread out in the growing darkness, a testament to years of labor and dedication. Theresa thought about the letter that had arrived on a Tuesday afternoon 15 years ago, the words that had shattered her old life. She thought about the label that had been placed on her, Barren. How wrong it had been in every possible way. She had not been barren of worth or potential or love. She had not even been barren of children, though that had taken years to reveal itself. But even if she had never born a child, even if Carlos and Rosa had never come into their lives, she and Ethan would still have grown something beautiful. They would have grown love, just as he had promised. Love between husband and wife, love for the land, love for their community. Love that spread and multiplied and bore fruit in countless ways. That, Theresa realized, was the real miracle. Not that her body had eventually proven the doctors wrong, though she was grateful for her biological children. The real miracle was that she had found a man who understood that a person's value was not tied to their ability to bear children, that a life could be full and meaningful and rich in infinite ways. The miracle was that she had found the courage to believe him and to believe in herself. Ethan must have sensed her thoughts because he leaned over and kissed her temple. "I love you, Theresa Nash," he said. "Thank you for marrying a rootless cowboy and helping him build a home." "I love you, Ethan Nash," she replied. "Thank you for seeing me when I could not see myself." They sat together as the evening deepened into night, surrounded by the life they had grown from seeds of pain and hope and determined love. Around them, their children played and talked and simply were, secure in the knowledge that they were cherished. The ranch house glowed with lamplight, a beacon of warmth and safety in the vast New Mexico landscape. Years later, when Theresa was an old woman and Ethan's hair had turned fully white, they would still sit on that porch in the evenings, holding hands and watching the sun set. They would see their children grow into adults, would welcome grandchildren and great-grandchildren. They would face losses and celebrate triumphs, would weather difficulties and cherish joys. But on this evening in June 1898, they were simply a husband and wife who had found each other against the odds, who had taken brokenness and built wholeness, who had proven that love was not dependent on perfect circumstances, but on the choice to keep growing it, day after day, year after year. The cowboy had promised they would grow love instead of children, and they had grown both. But more than that, they had grown a legacy of choosing each other, of refusing to let the judgments and labels of the past define their future. They had grown a family bound not by obligation, but by affection. They had grown a home that welcomed the lost and the lonely. They had grown old together, roots intertwined so deeply that neither could say where one ended and the other began. As the last light faded and the children began to yawn, Theresa and Ethan ushered everyone inside. There were bedtime routines to complete, dishes to wash, preparations for tomorrow's work. The daily tasks of love, repeated countless times, were building a life one small moment at a time. Before they went to bed that night, Ethan pulled Theresa into his arms in the privacy of their bedroom. "Do you remember what I told you on that mesa before I left for the cattle drive? You told me a lot of things," Theresa said with a smile. "I told you we would grow love instead of children, if we needed to. I meant it then, and I mean it now. Every day I wake up grateful that you took a chance on me, that you let me prove to you that you were worth loving exactly as you were. And every day I wake up grateful that you saw past the label someone else put on me and showed me what was really there," Theresa replied. "We have grown more than I ever dreamed possible, Ethan. More than children, more than a ranch, more than a family. We have grown a life that matters." "We have," Ethan agreed. He kissed her, slow and sweet, a kiss that contained 15 years of marriage and countless more years of love to come. "And we are not done growing yet. They never were done growing." As the years continued to unfold, as the 19th century gave way to the 20th, as the Wild West slowly transformed into something more settled and civilized, Theresa and Ethan continued to nurture their life together. They adapted to changes, welcomed new technologies, and watched New Mexico achieve statehood in 1912 with pride and celebration. Carlos and Alina had 4 children, and eventually took over the main running of the ranch, allowing Ethan and Theresa to slow down and enjoy their grandchildren. Rosa became a beloved teacher in Las Vegas, eventually marrying a kind lawyer and having 2 children of her own. James developed his father's wanderlust as a young man, working various ranches throughout the West before finally settling on land adjacent to the family ranch and starting his own horse training operation. The twins both married local ranchers' sons in a double wedding that was the talk of the territory for months. Thomas, the baby, became a veterinarian, the first in the family to attend university, and returned to practice in Las Vegas. Through it all, through weddings and funerals, births and illnesses, triumphs and setbacks, Theresa and Ethan remained each other's constant. They grew old together with grace and humor, their love deepening with each passing year. They sat on their porch and watched the world change around them, secure in the knowledge that they had built something that would outlast them. When Ethan died peacefully in his sleep in 1924 at the age of 73, Theresa mourned deeply, but without regret. They had been given 41 years together, and she had cherished every single day. She lived another 6 years, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, the matriarch of a family that had grown from 2 broken people who chose to love each other. Theresa Nash died in 1930 at the age of 71, in the house she and Ethan had built together. Her last words were about the mesa where Ethan had proposed, where he had promised they would grow love instead of children. As she took her final breaths, surrounded by the evidence of a life well lived and deeply loved, she smiled. They had grown so much more than anyone could have imagined. From the ashes of shame and rejection, from the soil of the New Mexico high desert, from the seeds of one man's promise and one woman's courage, they had grown a legacy that would endure for generations. The old woman who had once been labeled barren had proven to be anything but. She had been abundantly, generously, magnificently fertile in all the ways that truly mattered. She had grown love in every direction, and that love had multiplied and spread and borne fruit beyond measure. And somewhere in whatever comes after this life, Theresa Nash took the hand of her cowboy husband and smiled. They had done it together. They had grown love instead of children and then grown children too. They had grown a family, a home, a life, a legacy. They had grown old together in the wild lands they both loved, and they had grown into the very best versions of themselves. The story that began with a cruel letter on a Tuesday afternoon had ended with a life so full and rich that it could barely be contained. And that, Theresa knew as she closed her eyes for the last time, was the greatest triumph of all, taking what others meant to destroy her with and building from it something beautiful, something lasting, something that mattered. She had not been barren. She had been a garden waiting for the right gardener, and Ethan Nash had tended her with gentle hands and unwavering faith until she bloomed in ways neither of them had imagined possible. Together, they had grown love, and love had been more than enough. It had been everything.